Educating, informing, serving. Fact TV, keeping government honest.
Aye.
Margot,
Aye.
Priscilla,
Aye.
Brenda,
Aye.
Colin. Colin? Is he muted? The ayes have it. The minutes are
I'm
approved.
sorry, Molly. I'm sorry. I joined late. Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Communication and public comment. Let me look. I don't think I saw any. Is there any in there, Chris? Okay.
I have none.
Okay. No policies.
Nope, that is correct. We do not have any policies at this point.
Okay, let's look at reports. Superintendent's report.
I'm going to let Mr. Hodgson go first, and then I can fill anything he leaves out because a lot of the stuff that he'll be discussing would be in my report, so it makes sense to have him go first.
Certainly.
If that's okay with you.
Yep, that's fine.
So I did only a few hours ago share with the board a written copy of my principal's report. So I will hit the highlights of that as we get started, but I'm going to have you wait a moment here because I just need to close the door. Mr. Broadley's in the other office and there's a little echo going on here. So Superintendent Pratt asked us as principals to talk a little bit about how we are assessing instruction and how we are assessing students. So that's a primary part of my my report. And rather than read the whole thing to you, and it is less than 2 pages long, I'm going to hit the highlights. Throughout our time in remote instruction, we have been keeping our fingers well on the pulse of how things are going for students. We've done that in a number of ways. We have surveyed the students 3 times over the course of the last 3 months. One was when we kind of immediately went into remote instruction. Another time, a few weeks into it. And then the last time was just on the heels or just on the precipice of preparing our plan for continuation of learning. And some of those surveys I have shared the data with you folks the last school board meeting. So that's probably shouldn't be anything that comes to a surprise to you. I also mentioned at previous meetings that we have set up a system through which teachers on a weekly basis can report into the guidance counselors of their individual students when things are starting to go awry for a student. We then take that information and then meet every week, Thursday at 10 o'clock. We get together with all of our counseling staff, with Mr. Broadley and myself and the school nurse to spend as much time as we need to talking about individual students, both what the challenges are and what are the best resolutions to those challenges. Some of those have gotten students back in the right direction. Some of them have not, but we have continued throughout the course of this new approach to instruction and learning, taking a very close look at every student and how they're doing. Of course, as you might imagine, there were some students that were struggling for various reasons before remote instruction. Many of those continue to struggle afterwards, but some folks, a few of them actually liked the remote instruction better and kind of stepped up and improved their overall performance. We are also taking advantage of a survey recently sent out by the SU to parents and families to get a sense for how things are working for those folks. And again, it's not all about the survey, but we did just recently survey our staff on what's working, what's not working. But that was really done with the intention of starting our planning for next year. So we want to capture the lessons learned and prepare ourselves for whatever next year brings forward, whether it's regular rolled instruction, whether it's a return to fully remote instruction, or whether it's some sort of hybrid. So, and we will have that opportunity to reflect on that and to take that information in more over the next couple of weeks as we wind things down and start doing our planning for next year. As far as student assessment goes, the best that I can say is I feel like our staff and our students transition very smoothly into remote instruction. We already had students with Chromebooks. We already had staff who were well acquainted with Google Classroom and already taking advantage of a lot that the internet had to offer instructionally. So by and large, the transition went smoothly. Because of that, our assessment of student progress and our student mastery of proficiencies really didn't change significantly. If I were to identify one change, and it's only a change in magnitude, not in action, but as you might imagine, students do their schoolwork, write papers, work on projects, do presentations, take quizzes, tests, all that you would typically expect for assessment. But sometimes students' knowledge isn't clearly communicated through those steps. So what I have seen a little bit more of, but we've been doing all along, are teachers going out of their way to go with some sort of alternative assessment approaches when maybe that test or quiz seems to have demonstrated a student underselling what they really knew. But the short version on student assessment is we've been conducting very similar assessments to gauge student mastery of proficiencies as we have. And in the end, master the proficiencies, pass the class, get credit for the class. So any questions on those two topics before I move on to topic number 3, which is plans for graduation? I see Colin, you got your hand up and you got yourself.
Yeah, Mr. Hodson, I was just wondering too, I mean, you pretty much answered everything that I was going to ask, but I just wanted to follow up real quick with you. As the staff, I mean, is everybody pretty comfortable? I mean, it's a huge adjustment, obviously, for everybody, but I mean, did it seem to work to the best that it could for?
Well, yeah, I think, Colin, I think those are the right words to use, the best that it could. I think that, you know, we took these lemons and we made the best lemonade we could out of that.
Right.
Again, I think that we had some advantages that we were playing to that I referenced before. This would have been an entirely different situation if we didn't have Chromebooks in the hands of all students. This would have been an entirely different situation, and not all high schools are in the place that I'm about to reference, but it would have been an entirely different situation if we didn't have teachers who are already comfortable with and savvy with technology and making use of Google Classroom. In the past few years, we have devoted one faculty meeting a month to Christina Smith coming in and just doing tech training on the next best tool that's out there to use in the classroom. And I think that that time and energy was paying off for us. Now, having said all of that, I think I can comfortably say that every single one of our teachers is ready to go back to regular instruction because supporting students, you know, education is a people business. It's a people business that is really well supported by technology, but in the end, it's a people business. And, you know, the students get a lot more out of the instruction being with teachers, and the teachers can deliver the goods a lot better being together. So I feel like our staff really stepped up to the plate, but I would get hung out to dry if I sat here and said, yeah, they're loving this.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you.
They are not loving this is what I would say.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Sure. And so the last part of my principal's report, and I shared with the board a number of documents that have a lot of details about our graduation ceremony plans. The documents that I shared are the same documents, except for some of the diagrams. Same documents that I shared with seniors and their families, but just to keep everyone all in the same level of information. We are moving forward with a graduation that is going to be an in-person graduation that is done up on Hadley Field, that is going to be done in full compliance with all of the rules, the regulations, the standards, the expectations that go along with COVID-19 safety, and the health expectations that go along with that. It's being planned not just in compliance with those, but these plans have been confirmed in their proper application of the guidance through the AOE. We've followed to the letter what the Department of Health has to offer. I've had multiple school nurses fully informed in these plans and informing these plans. So, and all these people that I talk to, when someone in the know says, well, you should probably apply this strategy or take this precaution, that then goes into the planning. But we're very happy and very excited to be able to have a more traditional graduation for our seniors. They've earned it. So I could spend a real long time talking about all the details. I'm happy to do that if that's how we want to spend our time, but maybe, again, I don't know how many of the board members had the time to read the stuff that I put out. I'm happy to take questions if that's the next thing you want to do, Molly.
Chris, I've got just one, then I'll get you Colin. What does it look like for anybody who is not a family member that doesn't have a ticket?
We are going to stream this live. And so for those folks, they're going to be able to participate, which, to be honest with you, is hopefully one of those strategies that I would like to continue with over the course of time, because now, again, especially now that flying is a challenge, traveling is a challenge. If, you know, Uncle Billy in California wanted to come to graduation, well, he can stay in California and participate in the graduation. So yes, streaming live through Fact TV. They've been a great partner in this, on this.
Thank you. Colin?
Thank you, Molly. Mr. Hodson, traditionally in the past, board members have been, invited. What's the status with that?
Yeah, I'm going to recommend against you coming, to be honest with you, because again, one of those best practices for pulling off these kind of events is to minimize the people that need to be there to the maximum extent possible. So even though there will be a lot of people there, there are a number of folks whose presence is less necessary, I guess I would say, taking nothing away from board members, by the way, but you will also get a chance, hopefully, to see how well we can make this live streaming of this work.
Okay, thank you.
Margot?
Chris, I just wanted to say thank you to you and the whole team that's been working on this. There have been a lot of community members that have been very concerned about this and very invested. And I feel like you all did a really good job of listening to the community and being respectful of where we are with, our health situation and the expectations from the state, and have really come up with a workable plan.
Well, I appreciate that, Margot. I will note, because I think it's important to know that there's always two sides to every position and every argument. Besides people that are currently in this meeting, there have been community members that have reached out to me just today that said, really? And I've said, really. So.
I got Jack and Priscilla. So Priscilla, go ahead.
I just wanted to echo Margot. I think the letters were absolutely impressive, and you're covering every detail that I could possibly think of. So just kudos to you, Mr. Hodgson.
Thank you, Priscilla.
Jack?
I rarely dissent in these matters, but this is one where I recognize I'm a minority of one, but I'm going to at least make certain that I'm on the record about this. I think this was ill-advised. It's too late to pull it back. I think that we needed to pay more attention to the 40% of the students who expressed concern about attending, and we failed to do so. We had discussed, and I thought had an understanding that we would have a discussion with the board before issuing these guidelines. That failed to happen. This is still a virus that is killing people. It's still a virus that particularly targets people of the demographic, of the age of parents of our graduating students. It's a pandemic that, despite social distancing, infected 10% of the folks who attended at the West Point graduation under even more rigorous ground rules than we are putting forth. And this is not an entirely voluntary thing. We have people that are going to have to manage this process. They're going to be teachers, they're going to be policemen, they're going to be all sorts of folks who at one level or another are not going to have a voluntary choice. They're going to have to be there, and we are putting them at risk. And I am candidly appalled. Now I recognize everyone, I'm the one guy saying all this, and I'm being the one throwing the dirt on a party, but I'm very unhappy. I think it's ill-advised. The medical people that I've spoken to are absolutely aghast, and here we are. But I guess we're doing it, so let's just cross our fingers and hope we're lucky.
Molly, can I respond to a few of those points that Jack made?
Absolutely.
So I think it's really important that we have these conversations, that when we are speaking from a level of fact, that the facts are as straight as they can be. When you referenced West Point, I will note I have a nephew in the graduating class at West Point this year. And so I just want to make this clear. When you say that there were 10 folks who were found to be COVID-19 positive in that graduating class, you are 100% right. But that was found after they came, not because of the event. So I just want to make that clear. When you say that, Jack, it makes it sound like because of West Point's planned event, people became COVID-19 positive. These people came from many places around the world, around the world, but particularly around the country. My nephew lives in Texas. He came from Texas. So all these people came there having become infected where they were. So to use that as an example doesn't really speak well to what we have going on here. So that's the first point that I would like to make. The second point that I would like to make, Jack, is that you have referenced that you have medical people who are appalled that we are doing this. I have to tell you that I have been touching base with and fully connecting with medical people on this who have vetted and support this plan, which include medical people who are not just trained medical people, but are also trained in education as well. So the point here is, as we move forward making plans that go to a loosening of restrictions, we will always run into situations where a certain segment of the population's comfort level will be challenged. That's not a bad thing. I'm not saying that as in shame on those people, but that's the fact. But our obligation is going to be to come up with plans for graduation, for the start of the next school year, that are done in full compliance with the expectations that are set forth for us by, at the very least, the AOE and the Vermont Department of Health. And I would say, as long as we are doing them in full compliance with the expectations of the AOE and the Vermont Department of Health, it does not mean that there is no risk at all. But what it does mean is we are following the rules and we are establishing the programming and the events for our students within the bounds of those rules. And that's the best we can do. That's all I got.
Okay, thank you. Superintendent's report?
Yeah, just to talk a little more. First, I would like to thank Chris and all his staff at the high school for, like Priscilla said, coming up with a very in-depth protocol and process and how this is going to be done. Chris is correct. We are following all the rules that are laid out for us, health regulations and by the AOE. We got it verified by Secretary French that, that we were reading the guidance correctly in regards to when they upped it to 25 people. So we had some questions there. So before we move forward with the plans that Chris and his team had for graduation and making those additional changes based on the 25 to increase, we were able to get a quick response from Secretary French in regards to, yes, we were interpreting it accurately. And as long, we have the people spread out as according to Chris's plan and his team's plan, that, we can move forward with it. I can see both sides of the argument. But what I've learned very quickly in everything that we're going through is that there's no way we're going to be able to make everyone happy. And this isn't about making everyone happy. This is trying to put a little more of normalcy into a very difficult year that students, parents, and the community are seeing. And if we can do it in a way that we're doing everything we can by following the procedures put out there and the law put out there in regards to social distancing, then we want to give it a shot. So I appreciate Chris and his team for all the work they're doing. And, hopefully, I'm optimistic this is going to be a positive experience. And like I said, if anything else, we're providing a little bit of normalcy during a difficult time that I think everyone, but especially some of these seniors who missed out on a lot of their senior year that, they're not going to have. So I think it's the least we can do. We wouldn't have been able to do it if the guidelines stayed in place as they were. But Chris and his team were able to put it together and make some last minute changes, which was no easy, feat to do. So all we can do is keep moving forward with all the daily changes that we are encountering. So I wanted to thank him for that. Moving on, as most of you know, I put a survey out to the public because we are trying to plan as best we can as a SU to come up with a plan for the fall. A plan not knowing whether or not we will be back in the schools or not. But like I've always said, we want to hope for the best and plan for the worst. But so we are working on that. I've had each school come up with a task force that represents nurses, administrators, teachers, special educators, technology, custodians, pretty much everyone. And so the first phase of this was each task force was given the task. I gave them the task to come up with the questions that we have that need to be answered. So either, that we need to pose to the state or whoever so we can come up with a plan. And that was the first phase. I think the next phase moving forward is now that we have these questions and hopefully we're slowly getting some of these questions answered, is that phase 2 would be taking a representative from each of the school task force and coming up with an SU task force so we can really start having an approach to what going back to school looks like. I'm doing a lot of research, and so we don't have to create the wheel. There's a lot of states right now coming up with these plans to get kids back in schools. Maryland is one that the state of Vermont's looking at very closely. So hopefully we don't have to reinvent too much of the wheel. What we'd like to do is take the best from all the plans, and hopefully, in a perfect world, that would work. But there are so many factors and so many different levels to what we're looking at when we don't know if we were going to be back in the schools in the fall. One thing I can say is that if anyone's been keeping an eye on the data recently, since, a lot of the states who went back to, opening the state back up over the last weeks, anyone who can look at data and see that the number of cases are going back up astronomically. So we don't know what that's going to look like for us in the fall. But just so the board knows and the public knows is that we are well in the midst of trying to come up with a plan for when we do return back to school without having all the specifics that go along with creating a plan. So we're well underway with that. Also that the last day of school was changed to June 12th. Initially I wrote to the Secretary of Education and got our those 2 days that we took off at the beginning of this crisis and got those waived. And then a couple weeks ago, I submitted for the snow days that we had, and they were graciously willing to waive those days as well, not so it didn't count towards so it counted towards the 175 days. So that's why June 12th is going to be the last student day. Anything after the 12th is on the 5th, on Friday, this coming Friday the 5th. After the 5th and for the last week of school, there'll be no new learning implemented or given to students, meaning the teachers are going to spend time checking in with students, any final assessments that have to do, and just wrapping things up like they usually would at the end of the year. So so when the Friday that the 12th comes, that everyone's in pretty good shape with checking in with their students and getting everything back from them that they need to go over. In addition to that, the week of the 15th through the 19th, there'll be professional development. All teachers and staff will still have things they need to do, professional development, and also this is a good time to start getting ready for the fall, whatever it looks like. A lot of schools, since the state upped the group sizes to 25, are allowing teachers to come back in and get stuff and get organized. And the administrators have done a good job of organizing that. So we're not, a lot of the buildings, we don't have to worry about being over 25 with staff because we don't have over 25 in staff, but they've been doing a good job organizing that so teachers can get back into their classrooms. Summer learning will take place. We'll have the summer extended school year programs and some summer programs, camps going on, but it's all going to be virtually done over the computer. So kids will have an option. I know people are really sick of all the online stuff, but at this point, that's what we're going to be providing. And we will, and last but not least, we will continue to provide summer meals to, as we have been doing. It's going to look very similar, if not the same. And Holly Sterling, the director of the food service program, is working on what that's going to look like. But we will continue to provide meals throughout the summer. So that's where we are for this week.
Colin?
Yes, thank you, Molly. Chris, I just had a couple of questions for you. Were there any thoughts about, obviously every day is changing, but are there any thoughts about, if we do get somewhat of a green light, opening school like earlier?
No.
I mean,
not earlier. If anything, it would be, staggered openings for the fall based on those. One of the models we're looking at. There's a bunch of different models, but yeah, it definitely wouldn't be early because we're still waiting for some kind of guidance or directives from the state, so we can come up with a plan.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep.
Priscilla?
I'm going to go ahead and ask this question here, although it goes along with finance, which is coming up next. And I know there's $25,500 just from the high school account going towards the audit. When can we expect that audit report?
My most recent, after last week, we can expect that audit report. What I'm trying to think what they said. I have a email out from them listing it. They're saying by the end of June, but they can tell me one thing, but every month when I ask, it's always 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. So that's why I got it in writing from the RHR Smith in regards to what the delay has been and why. I can't recall if I've sent that out to all boards yet, but I did get that letter from them. But all I can tell you is what they're telling me. It seems like I go 2 weeks and we wait 2 weeks and they say it's another 2 weeks. That's why I requested a letter to see what the hang up was because, and I did tell them I want it before, but no later than June 30th because, June 17th, I think I said, because the boards need to know what the spending looks like. So.
Because that's last year. That's not even this year.
Yeah,
thank you though for asking. I appreciate that and following up.
That's the 18-19. I'll have to look. Does the board that's on the call tonight remember seeing the letter that I received from RHR Smith? Did I send that to everyone? Any of the boards see that yet?
No.
I don't think I've seen it, Chris.
Okay, I will. I can send that out later on, so you can. Hopefully, it will give you a better understanding of what's going on. It has been frustrated. I'm just as frustrated as everybody else. and we're at the mercy of whatever's going on. But the letter from them kind of paints a picture, but the bottom line is, like I told them, we still need it. And,
Yeah, because it's over $200,000 seems so now between all the boards and the WNESU. So that's a lot of money for an audit that we're
Yeah.
not getting any responses on.
and the letter
And
goes-
are they doing the same thing for 1920? Which, because that's this next year, which should be being looked at next month.
They're saying they should be back on track for this coming year's, for this audit, 1920 audit, with because a lot of their delays were due to the system, and then further delays when people weren't in the offices. But I'll send that letter to you. It may answer some of your questions, but in some cases it might generate more questions. But it's there's more cost tied to it. And looking at the letter that they gave me, it seems like a lot of the cost is tied to it because there's a few various reasons there. Some of them that were out of our control, and some of them will be very obvious that there was some control there. And so I'll leave that judgment up to the board when I send that letter out.
Thank you.
Yes.
Jack, you're up.
Thanks. Just remind people, because I think we forget, the audit such as we are conducting it was mandated by the SU board with many of us there at the time. The terms forensic audit and in-depth audit and systems audit were all used. Those are expensive. Those take a very long time. And it would be no surprise that this one was expensive and it's taking a very long time. That's what we signed up for. Maybe we weren't clear about what the implications were, and those of us who suggested it probably owe everybody an apology, but that's what we signed up for. And I saw some draft material of an HR Smith response, and it details the level of that analysis, and it gets into all the issues of finance, gets into how we got to the place we did, it gets to systems, control, and overhead in terms of the finance office. It does all the things that we asked them to do. The thing it doesn't do very much at all is the one thing we normally expect, which is the little budget reconciliation document that people think is an audit, but which really isn't. They're actually doing one, and this is what they look like. And I do think we need to make certain that their detailed financial analysis doesn't get in the way of doing the thing that is legally required by the state, which is the little report. But that's the difference, and I think it's important for us to make the distinction and not yell at people for doing the thing we asked them to do.
Okay, I think Chris, are you all set? Anybody, any other questions for the superintendent?
Thank you.
Then let's move on to finance. Teresa, would you like to speak to finance?
You still here? Yes.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. I sent out the report to Chris and stuff, assuming that you guys would get a copy. If not, we can, I guess, post it. But basically at this point, kind of like what I said before, we're just wrapping up the year. I'm trying to, I know that you guys just spoke about the audit, and I just want to say quickly about that is, if I'm allowed to sort of speak my mind for a second. And this whole year has been a pretty rough year. I've been doing 2 jobs since November, trying to keep everything going, and clearly my job suffered to some level of not having as much done at this point of this school year that I want to. But I have been working as hard as I can to try to wrap things up. And with that said, what I'll show you tonight and everything else in the reports that you're receiving tonight has all the revenues, has all the expenditures, every single thing that we know, especially all the revenues that we know that we're planning on getting and everything else. They're already posted. Everything's done as of 6/5. So it's completely up to date. This is not an end of May report. This is as of 6/5. So when you're looking at the first couple pages that show you the revenues, there's a couple, like our student, where we expected student tuition of about 30,000. In the end, we actually ended up with just one student throughout. So what I had hoped we would end up getting, we weren't. And so that's going to be 13,765. We're not going to get. Our community activity fees clearly down. And Jen is from the high school is going to just double check for me one more time, see if there's anything that's missing that we didn't get. The $90,000 that you see on there was already allocated from a previous school year to help with the revenues and obviously reduce taxes and stuff, money raised. So that's just kind of a placer in there. And the $27,000 is just a journal entry that state support for the VOTEC. It's the on behalf. And I had done the other entry, but I realized today looking at this again that I missed doing that one. So it's just a matter of a journal entry and it offsets the expenditure account. So they wash each other out. So there's no financial change or anything due to that. But based on what we're looking at, and if we really look at the reality of the revenues, we're probably, what won't materialize is about 15,500 worth of revenue that we anticipated. And then as far as expenditures go, I've marked a couple notes and stuff on, I can tell you the page numbers, like on page 3, we have $140,000 budget for regular ed. This has to do with purchased ed services. Again, I'm still working on cleaning up anything like that. That's a loose end for this year, because right now I don't know what those purchased ed services for regular ed should have been, as opposed to something that might have been sticking out for special ed services, a lot different. So I've got to finish following up on that. You'll see on page 8, long-term disability. It's a high number on one of those that's still encumbered, but we'll be going back and looking at the encumbrances, which I am working at with Marlene for us to review anything that's still encumbered, making sure that if it's something that shouldn't be, it needs to be closed out now. The purchase orders, the only one's necessity that's been being done for this virtually the last month and stuff. Other than that, it's pretty much receiving invoices and getting paid what's out there. So we really feel good about where we're at with that and everything else too. Going to page 12, that just goes to show the $27,000 on behalf. You'll see right there the 5566 account. So that's just the offset that I spoke about. Page 14, we have clerical dollar amount for the clerical wage line, where it's like over a bit. So some of these, I already know that I'm still working on trying to clean up some. When people were set up in the brand new system, the wage codes they were linked with, some of them were off, and it's, during the transition, or it's just a lack of understanding. Either way it goes, we're just trying to clean some of those up. So that it won't change the bottom line, but it might change that particular line as I'm going through these. Page 17, I'm just noting, again, the library has a high encumbrance amount. Could be legitimately everything, but we're looking at some of these things. The auditing services, you're already bringing that up, which we already know they're a lot higher than last year. And on page 21 and 22, and I skipped one, and I just want to say on page 19, if you go back, you'll see that contingency, which the contingency for the $96,000 is again the placeholder more or less for when the raises and the wages and everything else. We don't go back, at least what I've been understanding and been told is that we don't go back and break that back out and everything else. So it just sits there in that particular field for the year. So going back to page 21 and 22, there are this is a very clear indication of where the custodians and maintenance, A lot of the custodian hit like 5171, and they should have hit 5181. So you'll see that those two lines, yep, right there, 5171. Sorry, just a talking cough. So yes, and then on page 22, property purchase services and stuff is a little bit over like the 46,000. But when I went back and looked right there in that section, when I went back and looked into here, I mean, everything that I see as far as like that one being 70-something thousand over, where there's still 15 encumbered, everything there was legitimately some kind of repair, whether it's electrical, plumbing, something. There was $10,000 for actually about $17,000 in field repairs that were done, and they were coded to that. So there wasn't anything that wasn't legitimately occurred this year. And then on page 22, also the property and liability for those, we're going to tie those out. We have, you know, we're getting ready to do the last of the payrolls, and then what I'll do is a bill back for the substitutes, which I mentioned once before, and I'll do the bill back for the workers' comp and stuff like that, since we'll have those numbers. So there'll be a couple more tie outs that we're just doing at the year end and everything else. So if at this point, which I don't anticipate, but if everything did truly materialize as it was encumbered, that would be $800,000 still. There is a good chunk of that being $615,000 alone is wages and benefits. We do know that we have, you know, the last payroll that will come up, it'll technically be 5 payrolls worth of payroll for the, whether they get the lump sum or whether they get the summer payout. So we have that big, those big payrolls coming up. And then roughly about 186,000 worth of, which is just miscellaneous accounts payables. So, and then we'll be going through those, like I said. So based on that, if you go to the very last page, if nothing was to change, you can see that our net position would be forecasting that we'd probably have about $6,100 left if everything stayed as it was right now. And so I don't know what the protocol is because I haven't been here to do this in the past, but I do know that Bellows Falls has had to take a line of credit to get us through the summer and early fall for as long as I can look back. So I did the analysis in between our cash flow and everything else that I'm always tracking every bi-weekly, and with knowing what our expenditures are going in for the new budget, and you know, the anticipation of the revenues not being what they might be. And I estimated maybe even 80%, that's it, just to be on the safe side. So it still looks like we probably should have a line of credit of about $300,000. I know last year we did 400,000. We definitely drew all of it down by, I think by September, October, we drew it all down, and then we paid it back by December. I'm looking, I feel like 300,000 is the number we need to be at safely. But again, like I said, not knowing what my predecessor or what Edie did to present this to you guys, I might be out of line here, but I just wanted to bring that to our attention because we'll need to act on it.
Could you, this is Colin, could you back up and explain more in depth to me the 17,000 in field repairs?
Well, I can
do that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Last fall, a freeze arrived sooner than we expected. And what that meant was some significant damage to the watering system out back, field hockey and soccer. So we needed to repair that. It's really what it boils down to.
Okay. And one more thing, if I may, could I request like a hard copy of this? I'm having difficulty kind of seeing the numbers.
Sure. Is it something I have it saved anyhow, as it's always just downloaded. So I can
maybe
email
if
it.
yeah, that'd be great if you could email it to me.
Sure. I'll just
Report.
need your
Thank-
email.
It's the WNSU one.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
I should be in the list there.
Yeah,
All right,
Okay.
thank you.
and I
Can I
believe
ask
I
a
sent-
question, Teresa?
Sure.
So when you go to the bottom line, 25 of 25, and I see your 801,000 worth of still encumbered,
Yes.
right next to that is 138,776 number. Is that relevant to all of this? I mean,
Where are we?
for me, when I get to the bottom line and that's budget balance, it looks like even my takeaway from that is even with that encumbered, there is, and I also see your forecasted net position of 6,139 there, but what does that 138,000 mean?
That
Is it
that
an easy
is-
explanation? If it's not, then you and I can talk later on.
No, no, it is. No, it's exactly what you was alluding to, is that based on our current budget, excuse me, and then what we've spent year to date and what we have encumbered, you would be left with 138. But because if we go back to the revenue side of it, and that's the
Gotcha,
only
yep.
reason why our net position will be at
Sure.
61.
Perfect. Yep, that makes perfect sense. Thanks. And I just want to let you know, as things start to wind down here at the school, we really can help out with those encumbered numbers. In other words, there's lots of places where I can go to folks and really pin down whether or not maintenance, for example, any of their encumbered lines. I can talk to Jim DeBell and just help to make that a little easier process for you as we clean that up.
Okay, and that's something that I've been doing too, is actually a lot of times, like the secretaries, I've asked them to kind of review
Sure.
some, because they're the ones entering them all the time. So
Yep.
most of the time they know what's going on. So yeah, I've been in contact to say, hey, can you look at these and, tell me if they're going to materialize or not. If not, let's get them closed out.
Well, Teresa, if you let the secret out that this place is really run by maintenance and the secretaries and the staff, then you're going to get me fired. So be careful. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. I think that's all I have to add, unless anybody else has more questions.
Jack has his hand raised.
All right. When you talk about revising encumbered expenses, I always thought an encumbered expense was an obligated expense, essentially an AP that you haven't issued a check for. So how can we be, do we define that a little bit differently here? I know some people just have it as a planned expenditure.
Sure.
How do we use this term?
If I could take that on, Teresa, and then you're right, Jack. Oftentimes it's that, but sometimes, especially again, maintenance is my best example. Libraries and also very good example, that we will put in place purchase orders, let's just say for electrical work, with a local electrician that kind of commits through the budget, not to the company, but commits through the budget, X amount of money, $4,000, and it goes in as an encumbrance. But in that instance, it is not necessarily tied to a actual service provided. It's tied to an anticipated service provided, so that then it kind of streamlines the purchasing process. So Teresa, you get to
Right.
test
Nope,
whether I got that right.
that's correct. And the vast majority of time, if you find that the codes, the 4-digit expenditure codes that start with 53 and XX, a lot of times those are truly contracted situations like special ed and others. So most 99% of the time, those really do fathom out for what you see encumbered is exactly what we're going to have to pay out. But yes, exactly what Chris says is that really, I mean, for the most part, we didn't allow for blanket POs to just be created. So, but when it comes to maintenance, because again, like Chris is saying, certain things you might have get your estimate. So we need to make sure that that's encumbered for worst case scenario. But a lot of times that does come in a lot lower. But yeah.
As you can imagine, particularly like even library or maintenance, sometimes there's a timeliness of getting either something done or something in. And that's why in a very limited way, as Teresa mentioned, these mechanisms are available to us. But And
Yeah.
oftentimes, for example, we'll encumber everything under fuel. And that's another place where sometimes things become unencumbered and it ends up being a cost savings at the end of the year.
Yep.
Different people have different rules, how they run their organizations, and it's never been totally clear to me which set of rules we use. And it sounds like it's a little bit of both, but it's not it's nothing that I would push us on. I just wanted to understand what we did and how we did it.
Sure.
Yeah, a little bit of a hybrid.
It's life. Okay.
Teresa, I'd like to tell you that we haven't had a finance report like that in a long time. That was a nice job.
You like this particular one? I work with a software company, and I believe Springfield has this one too, but I got wind of this and I'm like, I thought this one was really nice compared to all the things that eFinance has, and we tweaked it a little more. And I think I said at the last other meeting that if there is something about these reports, because I gave you the two, one's a real summarized and one is the detail. And if there's something that we need to tweak that really just doesn't work, I can go back to them. They've been very, very helpful, extremely helpful. I cannot speak enough about Leslie and Michelle and Tim with the Power School thing. And for us, for the last, since November, they've been nothing but extremely helpful for me and been there.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear something positive. Priscilla?
Yes, I am pleased to see the amount of work you must have put in on these is really gratifying and really shows that you cared a great deal and that you spent a lot of time getting that in. I have one question on something I totally don't understand, and it's maybe a stupid question, but why does it list second 7 through 12 in parentheses, and then you have the same figures for BFUHS number 27? I just didn't understand that.
Probably in the comments, like when we have where you referring to like maybe page 1 or something where it says 31-secondary and 712, is that kind of what you mean?
Yes, on each page
Okay.
it had that.
Yeah, and what happens is that, again, when the system was set up going all the way back to the last January when it first got set up, there was a lot of things in titles that were plugged in, and maybe at the time the understanding of how it was going to work probably is why I guess the title might have been named that. But again, even some of the titles of what have been in there, I've been trying to clean up, because when I run some of the other reports, I couldn't even tell what the code meant, because all I could see was the beginning of, like, if they spelled out Bells Falls Union High School, I couldn't tell if what that was, a wage code, a benefit, or what, because the descriptions were cut off. So I started cleaning things up, and eventually we can get, it's one of those things like you mentioned now, that we can get things cleaned up.
Okay, so they're the same. So what you're saying is they're the same thing.
Yes,
and
in
they
this
just
respect,
repeat.
even though, because no matter what, in this context of secondary schooling,
Okay.
it starts automatically at 7th grade. So when they use the term secondary, no matter what, it's just coded 7 to 12. And we could
Okay,
leave.
but it
7
only refers to our 9 to 12.
Yeah, I mean, it just so
Okay.
happens our high school, but even though at the Bells Falls Middle School, the 6th graders are elementary, but the 7th and 8th graders are secondary. That's the state's definition.
Okay, but you're only putting the high school ones on this particular expenditure,
Absolutely.
and the middle school ones go on
Yep.
the other one for BFMS.
Absolutely, and that's why I said for our purpose, we could always change that coding just so it drops, or even, doesn't need to say that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anybody have any more questions for Teresa? Jack's got something here.
Yeah, I just wanted to understand, Teresa, you're doing a lot of work on this. How much of that was that report was built by you, and how much of it was essentially a punch out of the finance data? Because it's one thing to ask you to run a report. It's another thing entirely to have to ask you to manually create one from a bunch of junk that's coming out of e-finance and to plug in all the figures. And I kind of like to know what task set you're having to deal with here.
Okay. Well, I can tell you that I can't take credit for the report because I didn't design it. What we did was, and Edie was at some level back and forth too, but between us telling them, I gave a bunch of examples of the old software program reports because we can't mimic that in the new software. That's just bottom line. I can't even do it with the Infinite Vision program that I used, the other newer Tyler one. But we were able to send them reports saying, okay, this is what we used to have. This is the trial balance that we're used to and how clean it can be. And so they took that information and they developed a lot of these reports. And not just our school district did it, but like I said, Rick over at Springfield and everything else and other school districts managed to send them reports and said, you know, this is what my school board wants. This is what they're expecting. And they were able to mimic it. And they did it not so much inside the actual program, but there's the program called Cognos. Yeah. So I just go into that particular screen and there's tons of reports that they've created. And I just got like 5 or 6 new reports last week that I put in there for us to use and for payroll, human resource and accounts payable. So like I said, they've been accommodating. When we can give them an example, somehow miraculously, they created this report. And I just have to run it. I don't have to tweak it anymore.
That's
Before
what
I had to tweak.
I just wanted to make sure you weren't having to do all that manual stuff you guys were doing earlier, because that was crazy.
Yes, before this, I had to export out and I had to put lines. Right. I had to make it pretty and presentable. And that was very time consuming.
I just wanted our board to understand one of the reasons they weren't able to see the reports they expected is because you couldn't make them. And I just want to make sure that you didn't jump through a lot of hoops to get this one done. Sounds like you jumped through a few, but maybe you won't have to do so many in the future.
No, I mean, if this is something that you guys really like and I feel very good about, I mean, I'd like to stick with it moving forward with all the boards. But if there's something we have to tweak, we need to let them know so we can get it tweaked. But other than that, no, now I personally run these reports and go back into and really compare the data back and forth to feel confident that when I'm giving these to you, this is the numbers, this is the true numbers, and I'm not worried that this report's incorrect.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Everybody's all set with Teresa. We're going to move on to committees, and I don't think we have any, do we, Chris?
Hand up.
No, I don't. We don't, Molly. I just want to, thank Teresa because I think, I've been seeing the progress of the business office in regards to all the hard work, and that's been going into where we are now. So I'm just glad that Teresa was able to show the board that obviously you can see we've rounded the corner and we're in a much better place now because of the work that Teresa and others in the office have been doing, because I know it's been a long time since we've been able to see anything like this. So the board even having a report to put you somewhere in the ballpark of what we're looking at. So I think it's worth noting, and Teresa, she did a fantastic job in putting this together. So I just wanted to publicly tell her that.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Did somebody have their hand up? I didn't see anybody. No, looks like we're clear. Okay. David, you're here, WNESU board meeting review.
Yes, and apologies to the board. Comcast went down in Westminster West just before this meeting started. I chased up to the library, no internet, but I'm over in Westminster at my son Warner's house, sitting out on the deck with black flies. Okay, WNESU meeting. We had a meeting with a fairly large guest list. I think the major points I would make is we did approve grants. We did approve the SIP plan. We your board, your WNESU board chair owns this one. The board was advised that we had a business manager candidate, and regrettably, he chose not to take the position. I think that he may have sensed some poor management on my part. So that's ongoing. We had, excuse me, we had quite a few members of the public, probably a number of them were members of the association, who had questions about paraeducators. And some of those questions got answers. Some of those questions still need to be answered. There is going to be a special WNESU meeting Wednesday night at 6:30. I believe that will be preceded by a negotiations meeting at 5. And I think that's your WNESU update, Molly.
Okay, thank you. I've just lost my agenda. Sorry, guys. Unfinished business. I got you, Chris. Thanks. Is there any unfinished business? Jack, go ahead. You're muted.
Yeah. Do we need to, maybe I didn't see it just now because I've also dropped my agenda. Do we need to approve a line of credit? Do we need to do that tonight? Is that on here? I didn't see it.
It is not on there. I think it has to be on the next meeting, doesn't it, Chris?
Yeah, I would have Nicole put it on the next Bellows Falls High School Board meeting, so we can do that.
Okay.
Okay.
Saw
Thank
that.
you.
Thought it was missing.
So will that, being on the next one, since our fiscal year ends at the end of June, correct? Will that run into any problems with paying bills over the summer since we won't meet again till mid-July?
I don't think so, because it's still prior to July 1. So I don't know if Teresa's still on the line.
I am. So,
Yeah.
and like I said before, I apologize because I didn't know the protocol on this, which I knew it had to be voted on and everything else, but I didn't know. So if the next meeting that you guys have, if it's put on the agenda for the next meeting, when did you say the next meeting is?
I think it's the 20, was it the 24th?
The next meeting on the agenda says July 13th.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so we, so if at that,
Wouldn't we be able to just have I mean, it's a pretty straightforward action. Couldn't we just have a special meeting just with that as an agenda if necessary?
Yeah, you could. I mean, I was confusing the SU board with this high school board, but it does need to be done before July 1.
Couldn't we do it prior to the SU meeting and warn it as a special meeting? Or is it too late because it's Wednesday night?
Too late. It's
Yeah.
not an emergency.
It's too late. I
Okay.
mean, I think, I can meet with Molly and we can figure out a time to call a special meeting just to warn this.
Okay.
I don't like to do this step, but we can technically take and ratify it at the next meeting. I don't like to do that. It's not really, exact. It's illegal, but it's just sketchy according to the state. So,
We'll get something together.
okay.
David, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Molly. If I'm understanding correctly, this is borrowing authority for fiscal year 2021. Am I correct in that?
Correct.
All right.
correct.
Borrowing authority for fiscal year 2021 becomes critical when we need to utilize that borrowing authority. And of course, I am not a lawyer, but my belief is that if we do not need it for the first 2 weeks of July, then there's really no reason that we couldn't approve it at our regular meeting in July. I would really like to defer to someone who's more fluent with finance law than I am.
I don't have that answer. I was always taught that I had to do it before we needed it.
My logic, Molly, is that if we didn't need it until, say, the third week in July or first week in August, we'd be okay. Usually during the summer, you're borrowing in anticipation of tax revenues. And I'm uncertain, Teresa may know, but I'm uncertain as to when the cash flows that you would need to meet your obligations that are not being met by tax revenues would actually be incumbent on the district. In other words, do we have enough money to pay our bills through the second week of July when we would be meeting anyway? And I can answer that.
We do for July, for the first and second week of July, but by the end, because we have those 3 pays, like July 31st, that will be when it will be critical.
So after the board votes on this, how long does it take for you to get money?
Usually not too long. Once they draw up that paperwork, because they technically, we've done this with Community Bank enough times and everything else. But once they've drawn that up and it's approved, that has to be sent to them, and then they'll, it's a form letter. They already have it, and then they send it back saying, here's the agreement. And obviously our interest rate, if we approve, then you as the board sign it, send it back, and it's almost instantly.
Yeah, Jack's correct in his chat when he says it takes usually about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
The point I wanted to make about this is last year, literally, we were driving around in cars to get this done, and it was nuts. And
Yeah.
I really don't want to subject the finance office to play that game, because it's not fair to them, and frankly, it's a bad habit to get into. It makes us look kind of weird to the bank. So if we can do something to move this along, by all means, please let's.
So Chris Pratt and I will find a date, and we'll just have a quick meeting and get it taken care of. You're okay with that, Chris?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Okay. New business for discussion. Block scheduling discussion. Chris Hodgson, is that you?
I don't know that it's me, but let me start, I guess. I'm a huge fan of block scheduling. It does many positive things for our students. A little bit of history, when the Bellows Falls Union High School was opened nearly 50 years ago, and by the way, once we graduate the class of 2020, we'll be moving into the 50th class to be graduated. That's class of 2021. More to follow on that. Had big plans about trying to do things with that, but COVID-19 is kind of on the back burner, but that's for a different conversation. But when the school opened, it opened with this somewhat novel approach called block scheduling. And it has had block scheduling since the beginning. There are different ways to do block scheduling. When it opened, it was an AB block. And in an AB block, blocks are extended periods of time. So typically you think in terms of 90 minutes, but if you're anywhere from 75 to 90 minutes, you're working in a block, as opposed to a conventional period approach, which is like anywhere from 45 minutes to maybe 60 minutes of instructional time. In an AB block, like a traditional schedule, students will typically be enrolled in and attentive to 8 classes that last the entire year. In an AB block, it's called AB because it's an alternating day schedule. So those blocks of time are created by having one set of classes on one day and a different set of classes on the other day, and that's your A and B schedule, and the whole year runs that way. In a 4x4 block, you take that concept and you essentially enroll a student into 4 classes that are semesterized. And when I say semesterized, a class begins at the beginning of the school year and then ends at the middle of the school year, the end of the first semester, and then a new set of classes, a new schedule is taken on by a student, and That's how you get the same amount of learning and the same number of credits and the same level of success. Well, actually, you get you found you get a higher level of success in a 4x4 block as opposed to an AB block, but I'll go to that in a second. But that's how, in the end, you end up with 8 classes and 8 credits worth in either one of those, just as you would in a traditional schedule, a typical traditional schedule. Many of you may remember Mr. Doty, John Doty, who was my mentor and predecessor, and a couple of years into his tenure here, so that would have been in the very early 2000s, we switched from an AB block to a 4x4 block. The advantages that we expected are many of the advantages that we actually realized. But the most impressive one, and the one that kind of just sells this, is at the end of the very first semester of being in a 4x4 block as opposed to the AB block, we doubled the number of students on the honor roll. And that was amazing. And of course, we had to survey the students and find out what's up with that. So the vast majority of the students, and this should come as no surprise, said in a 4x4 block, I only had to be attentive to 4 classes instead of being attentive to 8 classes. And in a 4x4 block, typically as we run it, students in a semester will likely have 2 core classes and then 2 elective classes. So now, in the first semester, you might be fully attentive to science and social studies, and in the next semester have your math and your English. Now, I will say there are some classes that run the full year, even in our 4x4. So to be true to what we are really running here, we are running a modified 4x4 block schedule, and that's just one of the modifications that we have in place there. The other great advantage to a 4x4 block schedule is for that student who starts out not trying very hard and then gets that aha moment and then starts to kick it into gear. And I'm sharing that with you because when I taught here, I was teaching in the AB block and year-long classes. Too many times in a year-long class, and again, I was a math teacher, you'd get to February or March, and a student will have already dug a deep enough hole that they really don't have really much of a chance at all. And then there's not a lot that you can do to motivate the student. So it ends up making it a struggle for the student to make anything productive out of the last part of that year. In a 4x4 block schedule, another great advantage is, instead of having 4 starts to their schedule or 4 starts to their school year, they get 8 starts. So that student that might have, and oftentimes it's 9th graders. Oftentimes you'll have 9th graders that come into high school and it takes them a little while to figure it out. So instead of blowing the whole first year because they took the first few months to figure it out, they will get a do-over, if you want to say, at the start of the second semester. And that benefits students greatly. Another advantage, individualizing instruction, personalizing instruction has always been important in education. It's currently kind of there's a trend in that direction. A teacher who teaches in a 4x4 block will typically have the same number of students that they would have in a traditional schedule or that they would have in an AB block schedule. But if they are responsible for 100 students, they're going to be, instead of responsible and attentive to and calling home on and working with parents on 100 students for the whole year, they'll be attentive to 50 students in the first semester and 50 students in the second semester, which really makes it easier to personalize that. If we have students that are going off to college, and we have many students going off to college, they're going to experience a semesterized schedule when they go to college. They're going to experience, wow, I don't have a whole year to learn this. I have to learn this in a semester. And we're setting them up for success as well with this 4x4 block schedule. I could keep going on because I really do have other valid points to support a 4x4 block schedule. And if you need more, I'll share those with you, but I'll stop now, take a breath.
So I'm not sure why it was on the agenda. I thought it was something that maybe you were looking to
Nope.
talk about. Chris Pratt, is there something you'd like to say to it?
No, I don't have anything. I didn't put it on the agenda, so.
Okay. David?
Thank you,
You're
Mom.
muted.
Actually, I hope I'm not muted any longer. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. I asked to put this on, and the reason that I put it on, I think Chris's points are all valid. The reason I asked to put it on is that I am interested in ways that we can improve the efficiencies in how we use our staffing at the high school. And I would like to have a better understanding of, and Chris has certainly gotten into this, but I'd like to have a better understanding of how the block schedule really compares when you're doing an apples and apples comparison, which is difficult in these circumstances, to the traditional schedule. Anecdotally, I realize in many cases it does benefit kids, but in some cases, I have heard in my own household when I had kids in the high school that a block period was sometimes much too long, and some of the education that was taking place in the latter part of the block would be somewhat ad lib. I will be the first one to admit that I think there is some benefit if this allows teachers to concentrate more heavily on a smaller group of students. But overall, my question is how we efficiently deliver programming. When I say efficiently, I'm talking about the money. And particularly with the fact that there is a fair good chance that we'll be back into a distance learning situation even before the end of the first semester this coming fall. I would like to understand how the block works with a online learning situation and what superiority the block might have over the more traditional 6 or 8 periods a day. And I'm completely serious when I say that we should also be looking at the block in terms of how that's going to work with a distance learning situation. So at that point, I will yield the floor to my distinguished colleague from Grafton, who I think also has some questions.
I sure do, but only 2. And this is a challenge to what you're doing, Chris. But there are really 2 questions that I think are important to surface. The first is, we did have some early evidence that kids in this remote instructional environment were tuning out relatively early compared to what was going on in the classrooms. And this was something we have talked about in a prior session. I don't know if you remember, this was early on in our new COVID life. And I want to be sure, and I want some understanding as to whether or not these longer engagements really work when kids, start to glaze over after half an hour. For an hour and a half is really something we can do. So that's one. And the second is we really are almost certainly going to find ourselves heading to more close coordination with state online education resources. And they're on a schedule too. And I want to know, are we, or what is their schedule? What is their routine? Because we really probably owe it to ourselves to sync up with that. And I have no idea whether it's, hourly 50 minutes, 2 hours, 5 minutes, but we need to be thinking about that.
So know that in our plan for continuation of learning, that plan, as it's configured with best practice in mind, and block scheduling do not align at all. And I'm saying that because we, like probably most high schools in Vermont, are limiting ourselves to 3 hours of direct instruction, and we are limiting ourselves to less than 40 minutes per class. And so the conversation about block scheduling coupled with the conversation about remote learning, really does become something of an apples and oranges situation. It's really hard to talk about the two of them side by side because they are so inherently different in what teachers are able to do with students. So for example, there's a huge difference between managing this kind of experience that we're all doing now, because we're now an hour and 32 minutes into, or an hour and 22 minutes into this meeting. And if you're not sick of hearing me talk by this point, then good on you. But I have to say this, if you think about 90 minutes of instruction as a block with a teacher there, with a social studies teacher that has set up stations for students to go to, or a science teacher that has a lab activity, or even a math teacher who just says, all right, folks, get up and shake it out, and let's go now cross the classroom and share your answer with the neighbor furthest away from you. All of those things are those tiny pieces, and I'll speak to David's point, that make block scheduling not just functional, but super productive. And let's face it, the first year that we were working 4x4 block schedule, David, if that's what your kids experienced, I fully believe that there were growing pains along the way, because you were taking teachers who were accustomed to something different and asking them to change their practice. Now, being nearly 20 years into this, we've got it down. What was your other question, Jack, was related to, what was the other question?
It was remote, the fact that the state is increasingly putting together online education programs. They're really starting to build that online high school we used to talk about. And I want to know what their practices are, because I think it's in our interest to sync with them.
So I can give you a little bit of that. What VTVLC does predominantly, and I'm going to speak with that as the reference, that's Vermont's Virtual Learning Collaborative. The vast majority of their instruction is asynchronous. In other words, we got handed remote learning as a transition from our current schedule and our 4x4 block schedule. Having had to figure this out with just a few days, maybe a week or so heads up, we transitioned that from a conventional situation to an unconventional situation, applying conventional practices, because that's what we had. We were in the middle of the semester, but the vast majority of what VTVLC does is asynchronous, which means a lot of what the students do in a class is not bound by a schedule and not bound by the clock. It's the students are able to make those things happen predominantly without relation to a typical high school schedule. So I think for us to try to parallel that model, I don't think we're anywhere near being able to pull something like that off, nor is any high school currently enrolled in their remote learning. But I will say one more thing about block scheduling relative to remote learning. I want to note that point that I made of that 100 student teacher load that may be higher for some and lower for others. But again, in a year-long schedule and a not semesterized scheduling system, if we were working remote learning for that, teachers would be responsible for twice as many students as they are right now. So it's to our advantage that we are semesterized in this 4x4 block schedule, particularly with what we're doing right now. And I would say moving forward, that's one of those advantages, that teachers will be able to continue to have a better capacity to personalize their work with students. So I hope those answered your questions, Jack.
So I've got Priscilla, and then Colin, I'll get you.
Yes, when I first came and was doing block, I was thinking, oh, I can't do this, I can't do it. I have worked in both situations. The block scheduling is by far better than the other one. I've worked with special needs kids that use the programs from the tech center, and we're trying to do those classes. If I didn't have that 90-minute block, that full block to use with those kids, I couldn't have possibly gotten those kids through those courses because they needed that amount of time. that said, you have a lot of other advantages too. There's one other thing you can do, like with special needs kids. We could split the block and do a short one period with one set of kids and one with the other, if we needed to do that. So you had that advantage by having that set up that way. It gave that intensity. Those kids that can't deal with the AB program that he was talking about, one set of classes one day and one the other, sometimes they couldn't deal with those number of classes, whereas if you put them in a full semester and you're blocking them and they're doing them every day, they get to concentrate on that subject and really learn that subject. So that's another advantage. I loved it. It worked for me. It also, I know David was concerned about the time that he was saying, well, a full block off for teachers, but they have a planning period and then they will have an assignment for the other half. So they really only have an eighth of a day that they have for planning. So that works too. Whereas the other way, you've got a period every day and you could end up with extra because the students can't take that number of classes. To me, I'm totally sold on it. I wouldn't ever want the high school to go back to the traditional other one period all through the day, which is what I used in high school for me when I was taking classes, and what I taught in a school in Maryland was the same way for high school. So yeah, the block to me is much better. Thanks.
Colin, you're next.
Thank you. Well, after waiting that long for a response, Mr. Hodgson, as a former student, I would never get sick of not listening to you. But anyway, as a former student, the block scheduling for me, I thought was a great model. I thought it worked really well. As for these, few comments of students kind of, gazing out a window or staring at the ceiling after the 90 period, time frame. I kind of disagree with that, but everybody's different. Each model of each student works at a different level. And my thing is, it's not broke. Let's not fix it. I mean, we've been doing it for all these years. Let's, continue doing it. Also, I think, if there are concerns about the block scheduling, I think, the recommendation, the administration would be coming to us, and saying, okay, this XYZ is not working over here and whatnot. So again, I think, let's just keep it the way it is. Thank you.
So Chris, I'm glazed right over. I'm moving on to the next one.
Works for me.
Molly, can I say one thing too? If you have the short 40 minutes, you don't always have time to do the practice for the students, and you don't have the time to do the activities and the lab work for science,
So,
or the extra.
I don't think anybody's arguing with you, Priscilla. I don't even really know why it's on the agenda right now, but we've talked about it, and
I'm
thank
done.
you, and we're gonna move on. Appointments. We'd like to appoint a full-time driver's education teacher for 2020-2021 school year. I'm tickled to think that you found one.
Well, we did, and I feel good that we found a good one, but let me start with the numbers, because I want to be very clear that we budgeted for a half-time driver's ed teacher. But I will tell you that we also budgeted for a half-time health teacher, and you're happy that we found a driver's ed teacher. We had a harder time finding anyone to take on the half-time health position. And so without that, let me just speak to health for a moment. We do have a science teacher who is licensed in health, and she's been teaching health. Typically, Kristen Gottschalk has done health 2, and Jack Cahoon had done health 1. We are going to cover our health need both through Kristen Gottschalk taking on a little bit more health while still teaching some science classes. But we also have some online approaches that we are going to apply to that really important graduation requirement. So it's going to be a mix of some students getting it in the classroom and some students doing it through VTVLC health course. And I will also, to toot Kristen's horn, she's also a VTVLC teacher who, for the Bellows Falls Union High School and for VTVLC, teaches a VTVLC class. And when we do that and we set up a partnership with VTVLC, we have to free up some of her time during the day to do that, even though, again, it's still an asynchronous course. But the benefit to us is we get a significant number of free seats to VTVLC. So it's really kind of a win-win across the board. I mean, we've had at any given time up to 3 teachers serving VTVLC and serving us and getting us those extra seats as well. So that's how we're covering health. Now let's go back to driver's ed. If you take the half-time driver's ed position as budgeted and the half-time health position as budgeted and add them together, we will end up saving money. We will be spending less money for this full-time driver's ed teacher than we would for what we budgeted for the driver's ed and the health teacher. So I just want to make sure that we're clear about that. We budgeted for a half-time driver's ed teacher. By hiring him full-time, we're going to start taking on the backlog that has been created here, and it is not going to be any more expensive. In fact, it'll be less expensive. And if you like that, we're not going to do summer driver's ed. And we had budgeted for summer driver's ed. We aren't doing summer driver's ed because when it came time to start planning that, the Department of Transportation had not had enough information for us to figure out how to do it. So we just said, we're not going to do summer driver's ed. We're going to focus on the school year. And so know that that's kind of the financial end of it. Now, the important part, who are we talking about? John Tribuna is his name. He does
Say that again?
Tribuna, John, Tribuna. And I'll be looking for a motion for the board to appoint him as our driver to a full-time, a 1.0 FTE position for driver's ed. While he does not have an educator's license, he has a license to teach driver's ed. He's been teaching driver's ed the past few years. And he actually has been doing that with a private company. But he does have a master's degree in education. Let me get this here. Just a second. He has a Master's of Arts in teaching English to students of other languages, and that's through SIT. So he's taught driver's ed. He's got background in education. It shouldn't be difficult at all for us to get him both a provisional and then a full endorsement as an educator. But that's the quick and dirty on John Tribuna.
Okay, so we need a motion on this?
Yep.
Can somebody give me a
I'll
motion?
go ahead and move that motion, Molly.
Second.
Okay, we have a
Second.
motion to hire a full-time driver's education teacher for 2020, 2021, and his name is John Tribuna.
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 Yep.
And we've got a second. Is there any more discussion? Okay, I'm gonna call your name out. Deb,
Yes.
Margot,
Yes.
Priscilla,
Yes,
Brenda,
Yes.
Colin,
Yes.
Jack. I didn't hear you, Jack.
Yeah, no,
Thanks. No?
no, we're going to hire a full-time master's position for a position that'll be half-time the following year. I respect the decision, but I would not do that.
will it be full-time?
David?
Yes, Molly.
The motion passes. We have hired a full-time driver's education teacher.
Thank you.
And I think I've probably trashed his last name, but I heard John Tribuna.
Tribuna.
Got it.
Tribuna.
Tribuna. Okay, thank you very much. That's job well done. There is no need for an executive session, right, Chris?
Correct. I don't have anything.
Okay. Director's comments. Let's start again. Deb? Deb Wright, any comments?
Yeah, I'm thinking if I have anything, so I guess I don't. I don't.
Okay. Margot?
I'm all set. Thank you.
Thank you. Priscilla?
Yes, I would just add that I'm concerned about the large protest group that happened in the square this last weekend. Although the cause was certainly recognized to be a good cause, I would hope that all of those people will do as our governor suggests and get tested during the next week for the possible spreading of COVID-19, particularly since our graduation is within the 2-week range there. And I would hope that anybody that might have it in our area would get it taken care of ahead of time so that we're not passing it on.
Thank you, Brenda.
I'm all set.
Colin?
Yeah, thank you, Molly. Real quick, I just want to thank Teresa. I don't know if she's still on, but really helping us go over the budget. As Molly said earlier, it's been a little while since we've had a actual real budget report, so I thought that was really nice. Secondly, I just want to thank Mr. Hodgson and Mr. Broadley, for their staff and their team for allowing with the guidelines as an in-person graduation. I think it's really important, as Bellows Falls is huge on alumni and huge on graduation. These students, for the past 12 years, this is really what they look forward to. I mean, this is a huge achievement for them, as with any graduation, but, especially due to the circumstances of COVID-19, I think it's just absolutely awesome that we're doing that. Also, just the traditional alumni weekend is not going to be Father's Day weekend due to COVID. The new dates are September 25th, 26th, and 27th for alumni weekend. So it's rescheduled for September. And the class of 2005, the best graduating class, is celebrating their 15-year reunion.
Whoa,
And that's all I have.
whoa.
We can argue with that, Mr. Hodgson, right?
All right.
Jack, you got anything?
Just one. At some point, maybe this fall, when we're safe and sound, I really do hope that we could consider having a retreat of maybe not just this board, but all our board members, because I think it's really important that we spend a little time reviewing both what boards do and what boards don't. I think sometimes board members get pulled into the weeds and try to micromanage our administrators on things that are really not our business. And sometimes we fail to insert ourselves on policy issues and community relations issues that really are our prerogative. And sometimes when we don't, that causes problems for us. No admonitions, no pointing fingers, but I do think it's time for a little board education, and I'm hoping we can do it sooner rather than later. That's all I got.
David?
Thank you, Molly. I do believe that Chris has Pietro Lynn scheduled to do some board training. Chris, you can just nod your head one way or the other if that's the June SU meeting. Okay. But I do actually want to comment a little bit further on VTVLC. Chris brought it up earlier. Of course, River Valley Tech Center is the board of control for VTVLC, and we've had some real eye-openers over the last few months from Jeff Renard, who's one of our former Tech Center instructors, who is the director of VTVLC. And what may be of interest to both boards and educators is AOE has reached out to Jeff pretty heavily to get some help in terms of training for online teachers. Now, bear in mind that the mission up until quite recently for VTVLC was on-demand learning for what we loosely refer to as high school age kids. Under an agreement, which we've directed the chair, Bob Flint, our VTC board chair, to sign on behalf of our board, we'll commit VTVLC to provide online training to the whole K-12 spectrum of teachers in Vermont. And I'm pointing this out, number one, because it's a pretty daunting task, given the much more limited mission that VTVLC has been fulfilling over the last several years. But also, I think that you need to take that as a read as to what AOE sees coming down the pike for Vermont education in the very near future. We're very fortunate, I think, to have teachers and paras, hate to say that, but it's absolutely true, and paras that show the real high level of dedication that they do to schools and communities here in Vermont. But I need to continue to point out that the paradigm is changing very rapidly and is going to continue to change. That's why I asked to get the block schedule on the agenda tonight for discussion. And I have a strong feeling that we will be returning to it at least by later on in the fall. Thank you, Molly.
You're welcome. So I have a couple comments. I'm gonna give Teresa kudos one more time because that was something we haven't had in a long time. And I know you've been in a difficult situation, and that was a very good report, and it was a report that I think everyone got something out of. Agenda items, I think that we need to get back to, sending them to Chris or I, just so we know they're on the agenda and know what it's about. Because when I saw that, I really felt it was something the principal put on. So I'd just like to kind of use the chain of command a little bit and send it out through there so that at least we know what we're looking at. It was good discussion, but I think we kind of put Chris Hodgson right on the spot here, and he handled it well. And I think we're already doing block scheduling, but not that it wasn't a bad conversation, but it'd be good for us to know what we're getting into before we get here. On that note, next thing is agenda items for next board meeting. Everybody has my email. Send it my way, and Chris and I will talk about it and get it on there if we've got time or if it looks like it's something we should be doing. Date of the next board meeting we've got pegged as July 13th. I think I'm going to be doing that at Old Orchard Beach, but that's okay. That's why we like Zoom so much. We probably will have one before then. No, we will have one before then so that we can get the motion that we need to borrow some money to keep things rolling. And I would like to adjourn the meeting.